Christ is risen. Christ has risen indeed. This Easter greeting has been shared by Christians on Easter morning for centuries. And we live out our lives and we call ourselves an Easter people. We believe in a God who is so powerful and so transformative that God raised Jesus from the dead. And because of that, we live with an attitude of hope. Yes, we are an Easter people. God is in control, and there always is hope. But just don't ask us to get too technical about it. And don't worry, if you have trouble explaining the Easter event to others, you feel it in your soul. And we're not alone. Just look at the gospel accounts of that first Easter. We have 4 gospels and 4 different stories as to what exactly happened on that Easter morning. Each gospel is a little different, but common to all is a bit of skepticism that led to real fear to Jesus' followers as they tried to understand exactly what happened. In Matthew, the story is written that the guards that were outside Jesus' tomb were so fearful of that angel that announced Christ's resurrection that they shook and became like dead men. And in Mark, it says that the woman, after learning of Jesus' resurrection, fled the tomb in fear, and they didn't say a word to anyone. In Luke, after the women went to the tomb and learned of the resurrection, they went to tell the disciples and Jesus' mother. And all but Peter considered it an idle tale and did not believe what they were saying. And in the Gospel of John, which Rosemary read this morning, the man who went to the tomb, they just went home after learning of Jesus' rising from the dead. It's kind of anticlimactic. And then Mary has a whole conversation with the risen Lord, thinking that he's a gardener, until Jesus calls her out on it. Fear and skepticism, and why not? Resurrection is not what was expected, and it certainly is hard to explain, and yet we believe somewhere deep down inside us that is exactly what happened. And so central to how we live our life is this unexplainable event. In an article that appeared in Christian Century magazine a few months ago, author and theologian Will Willimon talked about the Easter event. He quoted one of my favorite people, William Sloane Coffin, in saying that anyone can preach Good Friday. You only need to read the newspapers each day. But it takes a person who knows there's good news for the world to shout, "Hey world, he has risen, whether you want him to or not." And Willimon went on to say something I've never contemplated before. We need to remember that Easter is a risen Christ appearance, not a risen Christ sighting. Christ's resurrected presence is a pure gift to us. We can't come to the risen Christ because hope in resurrection, it comes to us. I don't know how many of you kept those gratitude journals. Here's mine during Lent. I must say that I began my journal with 1 or 2 sentence entries that were more for my husband than were for me. I would write that how grateful I was for the cup of coffee he brings me each morning, and how grateful I was that he did not comment when I ate the whole sleeve of the Girl Scout cookie box. But as I continued, my entries in the gratitude journal changed, and I began to see and look for God at work around me. I wrote how grateful I was for each of you, how grateful I was for the beauty of the sky and the clouds, and for our minds and the science that invented the COVID vaccines. I saw God at work each day, and I couldn't wait to get home and that evening and write about how grateful I was to God about it. The smile that someone gave me, the fresh water from my tap, air conditioning, they all became sacred gifts from God. And the journal entries, they filled me with hope. They made me realize that God was everywhere and that God is in control. You see, God is at the center of our hope. And at Easter, we proclaim this hope. We proclaim God's victory over disease and death. We sing that God has chosen sides and God chooses life. And maybe this year, more than ever, we know that the past few months of this year, we have found more in which we can find hope. COVID vaccines being made available, and we can see that there's a light at the end of the tunnel, which has been very dark these past 12 months. This year, we know deep down that hope and resurrection is for us. I saved a meditation that Richard Rohr wrote 4 years ago, where he said that resurrection is not a one-time miracle, that God continues to resurrect and give us hope today. The Easter message is that life does not end. Life is changed. The divine mystery of resurrection is that it is a transformation and a promise of an enduring relationship with God. And this is our hope. This is the joy we feel when we say He has risen, and acknowledge that even though we don't fully understand the Easter event, we know it is our good news. This past year, we have learned that every time we hit bottom emotionally, we had to let go of how we thought life should be. We had to learn to surrender to a higher power and to find God and our gratitude to God in ways we had not before. All of a sudden, a card, a phone call, a smile, a Zoom communion service became experiences of resurrection and transformation for us. This year, we realized that God can use the very things that could destroy us, experiences of tragedy and sorrow and of pain, to transform and to enlighten us. This Easter, we were guided to a realization that God points us to a life that's bigger than death. This year, we realized that being an Easter people means that there's always hope, because with God, all things are possible, and love always, always wins. Friends, Christ has risen. Christ has risen indeed. Amen.